with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson.
Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I remember way back before COVID, in the zeitgeist of marijuana legalization all over the country, including Illinois, that there was some people expressing concerns about legalization and what it would mean. But, of course, in many of the states that are most aggressive in pursuing legalization, you have basically leftists who want to take over all of the mob's rackets, and drugs is certainly part of that. You know, we see this in Chicago. It's with gambling and drugs. We're just waiting for
prostitution to be legalized, right?
Exactly.
'Cause that could be a revenue stream.
There's no question. And there have been proposals in New York to do that from members of the city council there in New York City. Also in L.A., there's stories out. You basically have de facto legalization. You have open-air sex markets in L.A., so that's probably coming, you know, because there's so much money in it. There were some concerns raised. In fact, Alex Berenson, who most people know through COVID, before he was on the COVID beat, he was on the marijuana beat because of the experiences of his wife, who is a medical health professional, with the incidence of psychosis, particularly among young people who are heavy marijuana users. But that's all by the boards. It's like sort of like worrying about young kids and their screen time. Yeah, don't worry about that. Not during COVID and not since.
What about like legalizing psychedelics, mushrooms? I mean,
Well,
just look at that pilot, off-duty pilot who was on that plane who said he ate shrooms 48 hours before and he tried to bring down the plane.
Well, Colorado's moved in that direction, but California, this is the point I'm getting to. California, Patrick Bateman there, the governor of California, vetoed legislation that was passed by the California General Assembly with supermajorities in both chambers. It would have legalized psychedelics and authorized Amsterdam-style cannabis cafes. So what's the problem? There's not necessarily a problem, said Newsom, quoting him here. Psychedelics have proven to relieve people suffering from certain conditions such as depression, PTSD, addictive personality traits. It's an exciting frontier, and California will be on the front end of leading it. But we have to set up regulated treatment guidelines with dosing information, therapeutic guidelines, and so forth. The bill that made it to his desk would decriminalize possession prior to these guidelines going into place, which is why he said he couldn't sign it. Of course, it's safe drug use in the ever-expanding category of drugs that the libertarians and mob economists of the world want to advance. So how is it going with marijuana? I think marijuana legalization is now in more states than school choice. That's sort of just an interesting cultural comment, isn't it? I think so. That's why I made it. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Luke Niforatos.
You want me to take this one, Dan? I can.
I just said it for the break. I don't know why. You know, sometimes my synapses misfire. Luke Niforatos is the executive vice president for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. He joins us now. Luke, sorry for butchering your name. Thanks for joining us.
Man, no problem, Amy. Thank you all for having me back on after several years. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
And my last name is a Greek last name, straight out of Chicago, where I was born. So definitely, you did a good job. You nailed it on the second time around.
I should. I'm gonna get chastised by John Cass for that mispronunciation. All right. So, Luke, what is the state of play with marijuana legalization, and what's your read on why California would pump the brakes on cannabis cafes and legalization of psychedelics?
Yeah, well, so it's been 9 years since Colorado became the first state to legalize recreational marijuana. We have about 22 states, so less than half the American states have chosen to legalize recreational. And we have about 30 states with kind of, different kinds of laws, some smaller, some larger on quote-unquote medical marijuana. And what we're seeing right now, and I just wrote a piece on in this latest issue of the Spectator about this. So for those who subscribe to that, they can read a long form piece on what's going on. But really, what we're seeing is the black market is dominating the supposedly quote unquote legal market in legal states. So a state like California, 80% of all the marijuana sold and consumed in California is still done on the black market. And this is, on nearly a decade after they legalized it. Colorado, black market dominates. We have 3 new foreign cartels that are illegally growing and selling marijuana in Colorado, and it continues elsewhere. Oregon, 70% is done on the black market. So the promise of getting rid of the drug dealers, the promise of getting rid of the cartels has gone up in smoke. The legal market just can't compete from a tax standpoint. As well as just from an ease of consumption standpoint. It's just easier to buy marijuana from your friends or from the dealer on the street than it is from the legal market. So I anticipate that will continue. You mentioned the psychosis and kind of health-related issues. Those continue to spiral in legal states. We've seen an almost 2,000% increase across the country in kids being exposed to marijuana edibles for their 2-year-olds. Consuming marijuana gummy bears, going to the hospital, etc. We're also seeing new kinds of illnesses coming. So cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, it's uncontrollable vomiting. We're getting upwards of 100 Americans now who have died from this. What happens is for someone who's heavily using marijuana, they get this syndrome where they just can't stop vomiting, and some call it scromiting, screaming and vomiting at the same time. And people are dying from that and really suffering from that, hitting the ERs. So those are some of the new things we're seeing, some of the outcomes we're seeing. And this was predicted. The American Medical Association, every medical association was against legalization of marijuana, continues to be against it for these reasons of what we're talking about. And this was something that Illinois was warned very sternly about back in 2019 when they slammed this through.
Wow, what the scromiting thing? So where are these people? You said there 100 Americans have died from it?
Yes, it's a brand new. We really hadn't seen this illness before. They still haven't even given it a diagnosis code yet. They're in the process of doing that because for those of you who are listening, do you know any ED physicians, any emergency room docs? Ask them about cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. I promise you, they will tell you they're seeing it every single night in the ERs now. Certainly happening in Colorado as well. What essentially is happening is people are coming in, they're vomiting, they can't stop. And for a while, people had no idea what the source was, and they realized that every single person who was coming in was a very heavy marijuana user. And so we're realizing that this is cannabis hyperemesis. It's a new phenomenon that is just happening all across the country now as people are using at a heavier rate than ever before.
And one of the points that Berenson made in his book several years back was you have to understand a couple of things about what's being legalized. This is not your parents' or grandparents' Woodstock marijuana. The THC content is much stronger and thus, much more dangerous.
That's correct. Yeah. So I think everyone thought, certainly in Colorado where I live now, when we voted on this, people thought we were voting on the joints and kind of just make it so my neighbor who smokes a joint every other night doesn't go to jail for it. And that's just not what this was about. This was about commercializing, creating a massive new industry around marijuana that has taken the marijuana plant, which in a quote unquote state of nature was around 1 to 3% THC. That's the ingredient that gets you high. Now we're talking about products that are 99% potency in the form of dabs. For those of you who haven't heard of dabbing, look it up. That is the new insanely high potency way to consume marijuana. And it's just having a whole different effect on your brain. Berenson gets at this, and also it's in the scientific literature, that people who use today's high-potency marijuana on a regular basis are 5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia, psychosis, other forms of mental illness. And we're seeing multiple new large population-level studies verifying that this is happening. And what we've done is we've shotgunned these brand-new products on the population, not knowing the risks, and basically experimenting on our public. And particularly in Illinois, there was this push during COVID of, listen to the scientists. And all the scientists, medical professionals, the head of the Illinois Medical Society, for example, testified in Illinois, urging them to slow down, don't do this. The science has a lot of warnings out there about this, and it was slammed through anyway. And you can't help but wonder, you have Governor J.B. Pritzker, the Pritzker family, they're heavily invested into Juul, which is in the marijuana game. They're heavily invested in the marijuana industry, and also, Joby Pritzker is on the or was on the board of the nation's top pro-marijuana organization. So you just kind of help but wonder if there were some other things involved in that rush to legalize, other than listening to the scientists.
Yeah, sometimes I experience scromiting when I think about the Pritzker family, but it goes away. This is just an anecdote, but it speaks to what you're talking about. I have a friend whose son, in his mid-20s, during COVID, as a lot of kids did, unfortunately, that were locked in and locked down, started using marijuana very heavily, and he had a psychotic break. He had run-ins with the law. He tore apart his apartment. I mean, just destroyed it for no particular reason. He got very close, if it wasn't for his dad's intervention, into serving jail time for some of his run-ins with the law, and he was AWOL. I mean, he was doing a lot of crazy things. I don't need to go into the details. And it was really touch and go to pull him back, institutionalization, and it took a good year and a half to sort of bring him back to 80 to 90% of normalcy, where he could hold a job and be productive and be peaceful. And I'm sure other people have stories like this within their orbits. So I mean, this is not 700 Club type of finger wagging about people who use marijuana. It's a discussion of what the pitfalls are that really got short shrifted and continues to.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is something that, whether you're right, left, in the center, if you value just reality and the facts, that's what this is about. I mean, the facts are, we're promised that this is a safe, regulated market where kids aren't getting into it. That's just completely false. It hasn't played out in any of the states that have legalized it. We're just looking at the data coming out of these states, and what we're seeing is black markets thriving, drug dealers are doing better than ever. Our kids are getting into marijuana because it's more accessible than it's ever been. And I think that's the key, thing to think about. You all were talking about some of the other legalization efforts out there, prostitution, psychedelics, and other such things. The reason why we don't legalize, these behaviors and substances that we know are harmful to society is not because, there's the comparison of marijuana and alcohol. And some people say, alcohol is worse than marijuana could be, and it's legal. And the reason why we don't want to follow suit with marijuana is not because it's going so great with alcohol. We have 100,000 Americans every year that die from alcohol-related deaths, and that's not because. And by the way, that's alcohol has been killing more Americans every year than fentanyl's been for the last several years, until just this year, fentanyl surpassed alcohol. I don't think anyone thinks alcohol is more harmful than fentanyl. What the difference is that alcohol is legally available for commercial sale and access. And so you have a large number of the population using it, and we see the magnitude of the harms of that substance at a population level. When we have drugs made illegal for common use, they're not as accessible. We don't see the harms happen at a population level. We don't see them magnified in that way and expanded by an industry that is trying to sell them to more people and get more people to use them more. So the point being, with legal marijuana, it's more accessible than ever. It's more advertised than ever because it's legal, and we see the harms in more people at a greater scale. And so I think that's the point that needs to be made here. Is it's not that it's worse or better than any other substance. It's when it's legal, then the industry is making it worse. It's making it more addictive. 1 in 3 people who use marijuana in the last year now, this new high potency marijuana, they're developing an addiction. So this commercial model, it exacerbates the harms and the access for kids as well as the general public.
Yeah, the whole argument, it's not as harmful as alcohol and alcohol is legal, is so tired to me. Anthony Esselin has a good response to that, which I've adopted as my own, the academic and theologian. Bissett, so just because we can't prohibit everything doesn't mean we shouldn't prohibit anything. You have to live in the real world and
right.
and what you can generate popular support for and so forth. I mean, we can't eliminate risk, and we can't eliminate people engaged in risky behavior, and in terms of including in terms of consumption. But I mean, for those who want to make that argument about legalization, alcohol versus marijuana, as you just made, well, alcohol is the proximate cause of death for more people than fentanyl. So by that logic, we should legalize fentanyl too. And you'll have some libertarians say that, but I don't think that's where the popular opinion is. And so, that little fortune cookie, it's not as dangerous as alcohol argument really doesn't hold up in the real world.
That's right. That's right. And I think with psychedelics, it was interesting to see California Governor Gavin Newsom, as you all alluded, veto that bill. And we can obviously, I think we all know there's political motivations and broader aspirations that he has, and it's probably insulating him from, in terms of appearing like a more moderate candidate later, and maybe that's what went into his decision. But what's interesting is what he noted, and you rightly quoted what he noted there, which is that there's no clinical guidelines, there's no dosing for these substances. And by the way, you all have quote unquote medical marijuana in Illinois. There's no dosage or guidelines for that either. I mean, you don't have doctors saying, take 2 puffs of your quote unquote medical marijuana joint, for your medicine. Same situation with psychedelics. And so it's just an acknowledgement of the fact that we are at a place where industry profiteers and entrepreneurs who want to deal drugs under a legal guideline in this country are doing whatever they can. They're selling it are trying to sell it as medicine, even though there's no dosage, there's no guidelines, there's no medical validation of these substances to be used by patients, and that's what's happening.
And during COVID, if you had medical
medicines.
marijuana and there was a line, you got to the front of the line. It was so goofy.
Well, it's not.
And you can't be on TSA pre-check too if you're on medical marijuana, if you're signed up for that.
Well, this whole medical marijuana, it's an oxymoron, and it's just a backdoor to full legalization, of course, as you know. But as I can't remember which med school academic made this point. It's not medicine. Stop saying it's not medicine. It's a toxin. So let's just call things what they are, and then have a discussion about some toxins that should be legal or not legal, and the environment which they should be legal. But stop calling it medicine. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's part of the game plan. So you have one of the leaders of the marijuana legalization movement back in the late 70s said, we've failed at selling this substance as something that needs to be legalized, so we're going to call it medical marijuana, and that will be our game plan to get it legalized. And it worked. And what's hilarious is we have no dosage, no prescription. When you take this substance as a medication, you have no idea how it contraindicates with other medications that you're taking. We're now learning that I don't know if you all saw the research that came out a couple months ago, that if you go in for surgery, they are telling surgery centers and surgeons you have to ask people if they're using marijuana, because marijuana users require 10 times the anesthetic in surgeries that non-marijuana users require. There's also a number of now complications they're finding in surgeries, certain kinds of surgeries for marijuana users that put them more at risk. So it's a very at-risk behavior now as you're going in for some of these elective surgeries. And that's just one of the many things. And what I'll tell you is there's a reason why we have the FDA in this country. There's a reason why we have a process for medicine in this country. It's that when you get a medicine that is to be prescribed, by the time it's approved for prescriptions, you know what other substances it interacts with, and doctors understand what they need to do with that substance if you are receiving it as a medication and you're going to receive some sort of procedure. They don't have any of that with marijuana. And if they do the same thing with psychedelics, which Colorado last year legalized quote-unquote medical psychedelics, wonder where they got that idea from, then you're going to find yourself in that exact same situation.
He is Luke Niforatos. He's the Executive Vice President for Smart Approaches to Marijuana. Luke, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Amy, and God bless you all.
Thank you. Very informative. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
You're smart, you're busy, and don't have time to waste on the mainstream media cycle. Salem News Channel, breaks that cycle. Topics that matter from hosts worth watching. Dinesh D'Souza, Andrew Wilkow, Brandon Tatum, and more. Open debate and free speech you won't find anywhere else. Salem News Channel. Not like the other guys. Watch anytime on any screen. Free 24/7. Find everything you need to know at snc.tv. That's snc.tv.
AM 560. The Answer.